All right, let's go. Welcome to eCom Reality episode 26. And in this one, we will talk about meta reps and why in most cases, most meta reps just seem to suck, right? So let's call it as it is. If you're a meta rep, ideally you're not one of those. But in most cases, if you've ever done Facebook ads, and maybe we will talk about other reps as well. But if you've ever done Facebook ads, meta ads, you pretty much know that at some times you might get an email from someone who seems to be working for Meta, and you will get some generic tips and so on, and then you will hop on a call. And usually that call, in 90% of cases, from personal experience, from almost everyone that I know, that call usually doesn't really go well, meaning that you could have just read Meta's articles and it would have been the same thing. And probably even more helpful because you could have read more than just two parts, which are just recommending you increase the budget and use Advantage Plus, right? So let's talk about this. Why does Meta support, I guess, as well, suck so much, and why even the reps don't help you at all, right? Because honestly, if we think about it logically, it's in Meta's best interest to help you to get better results, right? But I can pretty much let you know why that doesn't happen, because if you think about it, if you think about Meta, which is a publicly listed company, they make billions, tens of billions of dollars, right? You can check their numbers. And the thing is that they're not stupid, right? The Meta leadership, they're not stupid. They are where they are for a reason. They know, especially nowadays, they know how to make money. They know how to make money for shareholders, right? They offer a dividend and so on, but let's not get into the stock so much. However, they make billions of dollars and still they can't really help you. Well, why is that? Simple. Because just like with online courses, with online communities, it's harder to help beginners. And in most cases, you don't make money helping beginners. You actually lose money. So that's the main reason why even the sport isn't as helpful, because if you think about it, if everyone who would create, especially in the past, but even nowadays, who would and can create a Facebook ad account, if everyone would have access to amazing people, right? Then Meta's revenue per employee, that's one way to think about it, would be very low, right? Because if you think about it, each employee who is paid 50K, 100K, 200K, right, at Meta, if you think in terms of business, every employee needs to bring an ROI. So if they make 100K, they should bring 200K. If they make 100K, and this is actually more realistic, Meta's leadership might want them to make 500K in revenue, right? And actually that makes sense because it's maybe a 20% margin and so on. And if you actually check their margins for the company, they are around there. So they actually need to make at least 3 to 4 times per employee. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And that's why you have companies which are, I think, even worth billions, and they have maybe 10 employees or something like that, right? I think Telegram is one of them. And basically it's because you don't really need that many people, and Meta has seen that. That's why they laid off so many people in the past 1 to 2 years. And that's more so on the sports side, right? They just don't have time, because their time, if they actually employ someone who has experience, then they can't just sit on calls all day with beginners, right? Because they are paid like $50 an hour, and then they are in calls with beginners that don't even spend $50 on the platform, right? So that's net negative for them. So that's one of the reasons why support just isn't there, and it's not there for everyone. And then when it comes to the reps, so it's the exact same thing that I just said about the support team, because Meta does try to help advertisers, right? But they have Pepsi. They have Coca-Cola. They have, I don't think Tesla at this point, but they have the biggest brands in the world who advertise on their platform. Nowadays, Hims, Hers, and all of these new publicly listed companies, and they advertise, they spend millions per day sometimes on Meta. And of course, that's basically 100K per hour client for them, right? So of course they will dedicate much more resources to a client like that. So when we go further down the list, you have a lot of beginners who maybe dropship, who spend $100, $200 a day on Meta, right? So that comes to around 3K a month. And if you think about it, that doesn't even pay for one employee, right? In most cases. That's why they actually outsource a lot of the support. That's why you'll meet someone who is in Ireland, someone who is in India, probably other countries as well. And it's normal because they also need to think of in terms of the business. So this is one of the reasons we also need to think how the business owners or shareholders of Meta are thinking about you as an advertiser, and if you actually deserve or need that kind of support, right? So that's why in most cases you'll get someone who more or less has been employed because they can speak and they have some knowledge about Meta's basically articles, right? And best practices. And that's pretty much it. If you know the best practices, it doesn't mean that you actually know how to handle an account, right? It's just like knowing how to do a surgery. You can read all you want about how to do a surgery, but if you never practice, imagine what's your confidence, or what would be the confidence of the person actually getting that surgery, right? That's why in most cases when you do a surgery, you do it with a very old man than like with a younger one who doesn't have experience, because experience does matter in most cases. And it's the same here. If you get on a call with a Meta rep, right, you will actually be the one who actually teaches them a lot of things, because you probably have more context than them. You probably know, and this is normal to some extent, you know who your target audience is. However, when it comes to ads, you'll almost never see a Meta rep, except the ones who are at a higher level. We can talk about that in a second. But most of them don't really know about ABO testing, about creative testing, about angles, about concepts, about videos, about images, about basically what you're doing in an ad account. Like if you just show them an ad account, you'll have to actually let them know what you're actually doing in that ad account, and you're teaching them how to do things. And that's how some of them get better, of course. But in most cases, people who have their calendar full of calls, do you think that they can actually help you as much as a media buyer? Because we just need to think logically. In most cases, it's media buyers who have calls with the Meta reps. And the Meta reps all day just have calls. Like if you think logically about it, when do they actually have time to actually do the work and look at data and actually understand it and go deep into it? Basically, there's no time. So this just makes sense if we think about it. There's a reason why most Meta reps won't really help you, because they don't know better. Their role is not really to give you amazing advice. That's why agencies still exist and will exist forever. That's why media buyers exist, and that's why they'll exist forever. That's why creative strategists, especially nowadays when Meta is a pretty important part of advertising in general for brands. And then, of course, there are some exceptions, right? Because I've also had some calls with some Meta reps that knew what they were saying, because they weren't spending all day on calls. They were only taking few select accounts, and they were working maybe on a quarterly basis or even more often. Sometimes I know I had some calls weekly, but it was because that account spent over 100K a month, and even more actually in most cases. But I know it was easily over 100K a month. And when you spend that, that's around 1 million a year, right? And from that, Meta does profit a lot, right? So that's one of the reasons why accounts that are spending more will actually get better reps, more attention, more focus, and you will get better personalized data because they do have time to prepare some decks for you, and they will actually show some decks that are personalized for you. That doesn't mean those are not templatized, especially nowadays with ChatGPT and everything. Of course they are templatized, but still, it's to some extent still edited. Like someone still has to go through it and add some components that are relevant to your business. So I don't want to make this way too long, but this was just an explanation here because I've also questioned this a lot of times. Why? And personally, nowadays, I don't really get on calls with meta reps as much just because they are a waste of time. For those 40 minutes could be used to make a YouTube video, right? Which is just much better. And then you also get in front of other people who enjoy watching your content, right? So it's not a waste of time. And you also share your thoughts, which also helps you, but can help other people as well, right? So multiple benefits. So would I say you should never go on a meta rep call? I think you can a few times, and if you really are out of ideas or have good questions, but in most cases, unfortunately, especially if you are at a certain level, it will be really hard to actually get anything out of it, right? It's just like, if you think about it, to offer some other examples, it's just like going in the club and thinking that there you will find your soulmate, right? Or your wife or your husband, right? It's a very low likelihood. And it's the same here when you think about hopping on these calls and expecting that maybe something goes well and that you'll get something useful out of it, right? I mean, you can be positive and everything, but eventually it's just going to be a waste of time, and you have to decide if you want to waste your time, right? Because sometimes you will waste your time on other things, right? So you have to decide, should I watch Netflix or should I hop on a call with a meta rep? You could do either. Either could be useless or they could be useful in some way, and one of them is slightly better than the other depending on your mood at that time. So with that being said, that's pretty much it for this one. Probably tomorrow I will go over Google Reps, and if you're watching this later on, I guess you can already watch it. Should be the next episode. And until next time, that's everything, and peace out.